Well, it's not always easy to rate and rank experiences that you've had in life in terms of most important or most memorable. And so I'm not going to try to, but this is one of the most impactful experiences I've ever had in my life. And it's almost 15 years ago, and yet it still really affects me today in a meaningful and helpful way. And so I wanted to share it with who's ever out there, whoever's listening, and maybe the person who needs to hear this will stumble upon this video and it will be helpful. All right, so about 15 years ago, I asked my then girlfriend if she would marry me. She said yes, and as an engaged couple, we began to pick out our bridesmaids and groomsmen. And one of the groomsmen that I picked was a good friend of mine, still is. He came from England, and because of some obscure South Park reference that I wasn't involved with, he always went by the name Pip. And Pip was one of my close friends. Loved him dearly. And Pip was in a situation where he was going to need to leave the country for a period of time because his visa was expiring, unless he got married. And he had a girlfriend and he loved her, and he was thinking about marrying her anyway. And so they went through this process of deciding, like, well, are we getting married for the right reasons? And they decided that they were. And so he got engaged after I did, but he set his wedding date before mine because he needed to kind of hurry up and get married. Anyway, Pip decided not to put me in his wedding party. And he also didn't put a friend of mine named Aaron in either. And that kind of all struck us as a bit odd. And then he put a couple people in there that he seemed to not be that close with, which also seemed a bit odd. But beyond it being odd, it actually really hurt me. I questioned our friendship. It really, really, really hurt. And sometimes when we are hurt, we begin to look for a justification or a reason that will help our hurting. And I think that's what I did. I think that I let my pride get the best of me. And so I came up with this idea, which I think was plausible. I mean, it wasn't completely unfounded, but I came up with this idea that, well, he and the other groomsmen were going to go have a bachelor party and they were going to drink and have strippers and all this stuff. And he knew that I wouldn't be up for that. And so he left me out of the fun, because he didn't want me to be a party pooper. And so I came up with this explanation that seemed plausible, but also sort of painted myself in this really good light as Mr. Noble and all of that. And so anytime you come up with a plausible explanation where you're the good guy, there's a good chance that your bias has crept in. Anyway, long story short, he got married. And then when all of us groomsmen were at the tuxedo shop getting tuxedos for my wedding, my friend Aaron, who had also been left out of Pip's bridal party, kind of made a joke to him, like, yeah, hey Pip, what the hell was that? Why'd you leave us out of that? Why'd you leave us out of your wedding? And that wasn't cool, man. We put you in our, something like that. And Pip wasn't laughing or joking at all. He looked dead serious, and which was kind of rare for him. I mean, he was a really happy-go-lucky guy. And he said, well, you two were engaged. And we look at each other like, what does being engaged have anything to do with this topic, And we're like, Pip, what are you talking about? Fill us in. We're totally lost. He goes, well, you had fiancés. You were marrying Michelle and you were marrying Cade, and so I didn't want to include you. We're like, what does that have to do with it? What, 2 + 2? Help me understand this. I'm totally lost. And he began to explain how if he had put us in the wedding, if we had been groomsmen, we would have had to get there early and be away at pictures and sit up at the bridal table, and our fiancés would have been alone all night. And so he didn't want to put us through that. So he chose a couple of friends who didn't have girlfriends. And I was totally blown away. I mean, totally, my mind was just and I began to over days and weeks unpack not only how wrong I had been, but how confident I had been in my wrongness. It wasn't oh, I think the answer is C, I'll circle C, but I'm not sure. It was no, I know it's this, this is for sure. And it was one of the first times in my life where my confidence was at 100% and I was 100% wrong. And not only that, but I had fantasized the reasons for me being left out as sort of painting him as this bad guy and painting me as this good guy. And as it turns out, not only had he done it not for a bad or a neutral reason, but he'd actually been extremely unselfish and thoughtful and kind to me and the girl that I loved. And it just rocked my world, honestly. And it continues to do so. And so from that day forward, I realized that my confidence level is not a good indicator of my rightness level. And one of the things that I have done since then, although imperfectly, is when someone does something or says something that is just completely ununderstandable for me, just like it just doesn't add up, I sort of play a game with myself. I play a game and it goes something like this, like a magic genie comes to me and tells me, hey, James, you know that thing that person just did that you don't like or you don't understand or whatever? There's a really good reason why they did that. And if you knew the reason, you'd actually be happy that they did that. You'd think they did the right thing and you wouldn't be hurt, you wouldn't be angry or anything like that. And then I begin to say like, okay, let's try and manufacture a possible reason for this. So just like a really simple example, be like you're driving down the freeway and some person flies past you and cuts you off, right? It's easy to say like, oh, what a jerk. But what if that's a mom or a dad with a kid in the back who's, choking to death and they're trying to get to the hospital? Well, if that were the case, you'd probably cheer them on and say, you did the right thing. Or another example is like, nobody wants to get together with you for your birthday and you're really hurt and upset. It's like, well, maybe they're all planning a surprise party, so they all have to say no. Now, to be clear, don't let people off the hook, right? If some guy cusses out his wife in a restaurant, I don't just say like, oh, well, there must be some super good reason for that. I bet that's a fine thing to do. And I don't turn a blind eye to things that I think are wrong. And oftentimes I'll still investigate or try and talk to the person like, hey man, that really hurt when you did that. Like, can you help me understand why you did that? That kind of thing. But what I learned is that there's a big difference between assessing and judging, or evaluating and judging, or analyzing and judging. And one of the things that helped me understand that is when I was learning German, you're constantly learning new words and you're trying to learn how to use them and things like that. And I heard the word urteilen, verurteilen, and beurteilen. And whether you speak German or not, you can probably hear that they're all similar and they have different prefixes. And so I would take these words to my German teacher and I'd be like, hey, what's the difference? They're really close. How do I use them? And she would explain how one of them would have like this finality to it. Like when you go before a judge and he pronounces you guilty, you get sentenced to jail and that's it. Like the debate is over. The case is closed. Whereas other words like evaluate or assess or estimate or discern or analyze or observe, these words all mean like, I've seen something. I'm going to decide that that was a good thing or a bad thing. But I'm not going to like put the final touches on my thesis statement. I'm not going to say case closed, he's a bad guy, or case closed, he's a good guy. I'm just going to sort of add that data point to my graph that's I'm using to evaluate this situation or this person or this car company or this neighborhood or whatever. And you'll hear people say, judge not lest you be judged, which comes from the Bible. What's frustrating is that there are a few verses after that basically say, if you do judge, you're going to be judged according to the standard that you judged. And so I think it's pretty clear that what it's really saying is not to be a hypocrite, not to judge by an unfair standard. If somebody draws a line and you take a ruler and you say, hey, I'm sorry, that's 11 inches, not 12. And then you draw a line and someone says, hey, that's 11 inches, not 12. You're using the same ruler. That's fair. And that's right. We're held to the same laws in this country. Those of a particular faith are held to the same set of principles and rules from that sacred book, right? And so we ought not turn a blind eye to things that we see. Someday you're going to have to choose a babysitter for your kids. And if you choose well, that child may have a good evening. And if you choose poorly, that child may be traumatized for life. Right? So you're going to have to make judgment calls. You're going to have to observe and assess and estimate and analyze and evaluate and discern. I mean, all of these words exist for a reason. What makes judging a little bit different is that it has this finality to it. It's like, okay, I saw his pierced ears, I saw his tattoos, I saw his jacket, bad guy, end of story. I don't care what you tell me, I don't care what he says, bad guy. Those are the things you want to avoid. Now, I don't think you should turn a blind eye to those things. It's like, okay, I'm getting clues, I'm getting information, I'm getting data points. So far, it's not going in a direction that I feel comfortable with, but I'm going to reserve this portion of possibility that I'm wrong here, right? And therefore, instead of being a detective that says case closed, you're a detective that says, I've gathered a lot of data, and so far he's a suspect, but the case isn't closed, right? And that gives people a chance to change and improve and prove you wrong. That also keeps your mind open and your eyes open to see things that you may have missed if you just said case closed. I had a boss once who told me, he said, one of the biggest problems at this company is that people look at someone else and they put them in one of two categories, good guy or bad guy. The people that they put in the good guy category, they basically say everything that comes out of that guy's mouth is good because he's a good guy. And everything that comes out of that guy's mouth is bad because he's a bad guy. And he said, that's nonsense. You know, good guys say stupid things and bad guys say really insightful things sometimes. And so you need to be an evaluator, not just of the person as a whole, although there's a time for that, like with babysitters, but of what people are saying in their own right. Whether it comes from someone on the left side of the aisle or the right side of the aisle, we would do far better to really think about what people are saying. And last thing, there was a guy I used to listen to, doesn't matter who, and he would often quote someone. And you would hear this quote and you'd think, wow, that's wise. And then he'd tell you who said it. And it was like, oh, Abraham Lincoln said that. No kidding, you know? And then I noticed this other trend, which is people would say, I want to tell you a quote, and it's from whatever, Abraham Lincoln, or it's from Albert Einstein. And what they would do is they would be talking as if to say, because this quote came from this guy, you ought to believe it. You ought to take it for what it's worth, whether it makes sense or not. And then they would sort of stuff this quote down your throat. And I think the opposite approach is so much more mature to say, I'm gonna say something. I want you to think about if this holds water, if this makes sense, if this seems wise. And then as like the cherry on top, I'm gonna tell you who said it. And it was maybe a great guy, something like that. So this is literally one of the most important things I've ever experienced in my life. It's made me a slower to judge person. It's made me, I think, a wiser person because I've seen how there can be angles to a situation that you never imagined. And it's just like, hang on, hold your horses. Let's gather some more data. Let's ask some more questions. And I think that if more people would do this kind of thing, we would have a better world. And even if we don't, I think that you'll find you grow as a person when you be a detective, be an assessor, be an observer, be an analyzer, but keep the case open, always, forever. Always keep the case open and be willing to accept new data points that might change the direction of how you assess that person because people change, people grow, and you don't want to miss that. Okay, that's that. If you didn't like this video, that's okay. I don't blame you. Give it a thumbs down. Let me know. Instead, in this category of philosophy and relationships, I would say maybe go check out Jordan Peterson. I really like him. I think he's really insightful. I've learned a lot from him, and maybe you will too. Other than that, take care. Bye-bye.